Hey, you guys, Courtney Frick here. I told a lot of you guys that I'm here at Gary Johnson's class in Atlanta, and I'm asking this question to a lot of experienced investors. Pete, you've been one of my biggest mentors. Pete Fortunato out of the St. Petersburg area in Florida. You've been investing since 1965.
I started trying in 1965 and ended up closing my first deal in '67.
Yep, because you made 200 offers before your first one got accepted. So
Before the first one closed.
Before the
I had a
first
few
one closed.
accepted, but they all failed.
no, okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. So I've been asking everyone, look, what are your thoughts for rental properties, which is primarily what you do. You're a buy and hold investor. Primarily, though, folks want to know with the rentals, should we aim for them to be free and clear? Is it better for them to be free and clear, or do we want to use debt and leverage? What do you think?
Well, when you're building, you surely need to use debt and leverage. If I had waited until I had enough money to buy a free and clear house, I'm 77 and I'd be approaching my first deal. But I acquired my houses by making promises that I then kept.
Yep.
Those promises were the way I leveraged. I bought someone's property by giving them a promise, by making them a promise. I bought it subject to a mortgage where I promised to protect their credit. I lease option property. I had sellers carry. I borrowed money from people who had trusted me and I had performed, and so they lent me money for deals. And so always I was leveraging. Today we're looking at a point in time, I believe, when there's no option but inflation facing us, because the government can't tax, and the government, as a counterfeiter that creates money, gets to spend it at its highest value when they create it, and then it gets into the marketplace where the oversupply of dollars buys less and less and less. Yeah. And so because I'm concerned about that, I want to take advantage of acquiring properties that produce income, it's inflation hedged income. And so I'm using leverage all the time. I'm using leverage at my age of 77 because we have children and grandchildren, and we want to help them get the assets that will be inflation hedged income producers, thereby freeing them to do what they want to do. Now, I know people with many, many, many more properties who got to the point where they don't need to leverage more. They have the skills to leverage more. Now, I have those kinds of skills and connections after so many years of doing this. So very often I spend my time helping others, the friends of friends, the children of friends, my own kids, and encouraging them to get those assets. I think that leveraging is necessary to get your yields. If I'm buying a house or I'm buying an income property with 5 or 6% capitalization rate, I'm going to try to arrange financing at a rate that is less than the cap rate on the property. So by doing that, I get an override, and I'm not settling for 5 or 6%. That said, I have many, many friends who have enough assets that 5 or 6% is more than enough for them to live on. Mm-hmm. But if you're building, you need to leverage. Now, I leverage, and it's not using other people's money like you hear people talking about all the time. It's more often using other people's assets, using other people's credit, using the skills and the time of your employees. I use the skills and the time of my tenants who go to work so they can afford to pay the mortgages for me, and then later they can give me income that my family can live on. And I'm a big, big believer in leveraging and going out and acquiring the properties that you need by solving problems for people who have problems. And we just heard Gary talking about you'd never see a property that's been in a family for 100 years. And it's because of that, properties that have been in a family a long time, and suddenly they go up for sale, something's changed in their situation. So I want to try to help them, and I will bring in others, leveraging the skills, the time, the knowledge of other people to help me do that. But that said, once those properties belong in my family, I fully expect them to be in that family for 100 years and more.
Sure, and you're training your family as such. And so, you've owned properties. I know I've heard you talk about properties that you've had, for decades, right?
Since the 70s.
Yeah, so properties you have since the decade. So presumably they're paid off. They would have been paid off. But then I know that when COVID happened, you took both a defensive and then an offensive stance. Can you talk just a little bit about that? Because presumably for these properties you've had for decades, of course they would have been paid off. Why are you choosing to not stay in that position?
All right. We bought a property in 1995. We bought it subject to an institutional mortgage. That property had a 8-year-old mortgage that was based on 30-year schedules, 22 years left on it. It was a 10% mortgage and it was a break-even rental. 3 years later, I was able to refinance and pay off the institutional mortgage with one of my friend's IRAs. So I used leverage from human beings who were friends, who were allies, and I eliminated the institution, which is inflexible and dangerous in my eyes. After I made that refi, I improved my situation. We went from a 10% rate in 95 to an 8% rate in 99. Now we've got that property and it's doing great. And in 2003, we refinanced it again with an IRA that belonged to a beneficiary who was 52 years old. And so that beneficiary could not start making withdrawals until she reached age 59 and a half. So she had 7 years plus that she did not need income. She needed interest and yield in her IRA.
Just trying to grow it.
So
yeah.
we put the mortgage on the property to secure a new note written at 8%, but with no payments. So now with no payments, our cash flow went up, but we were negatively amortizing. And we did that until she reached age 60.
So you owed her more. You weren't paying her payments, but they were still due. And so you were owing her more and more.
It was accruing and compounding.
Yep.
And so in 2011, it reached the point where we started paying her her IRA, $450 a month, which they could have been paid to her.
Okay.
Then in 2014, she called and she said, my IRA has additional money in it. We'd like to lend it to you. And I said, well, I don't have anything that I particularly need the money for. And she said, well, I want you, because I've got this history with you, I want you to borrow $45,000 from my IRA. So we borrowed an additional 45. So now we started at 40. We went down as low as 25,000. We now are back at 40. And I'm sorry, we're back at 25, and we borrowed another 45, taking us up to 70,000 in debt on the property that we bought for $40,000 years before. We took that 45,000 and bought 3 more houses. Those 3 houses are all income producing. They all had seller carried notes and mortgages that are amortizing at low rates.
Yeah.
And so now we don't have 1 property, but we have 4 properties.
Yeah.
And we did that for another 5 years, and in 2019 she called again and said, I've got more money in my IRA, and she wanted to lend it to us, and we borrowed it then, and we renovated some of our houses, making our existing houses, because my portfolio was sufficient. And that's what one of the people that you're talking about who might want to be free and clear. Instead of buying more, in that point, we used it to put new roofs and windows and things in.
Yeah.
We were being, now looking back, too conservative.
Yeah.
And so we fixed up our existing portfolio, and now looking back, I would rather have bought more properties.
Just seeing what inflation did after 2019.
And then in 2020, you had the craziness when the government betrayed the Constitution, said there's no such thing as the Bill of Rights. There are non-essential people. They closed businesses. They told people they had no right to meet, and it scared me. And so I refinanced, again, using my friends and the IRAs that I know. I refinanced with lower payments, just like we did with that 0 payment for 8 years, to give me some breathing room should my tenants not be able to pay, not want to pay, but being told by the media and being laid off from businesses as the government shut business down. I got frightened. In 21, it was so clear to me that the government was creating money in absurd amounts. And I watched that money supply blow up and realized that I had to take advantage of inflation or become the victim of it. And so I then refied.
Yeah. So a year later, refinanced again.
Refinanced again at both lower rates and for more money, which bought more properties. And then I bought more properties where the financing was with the seller. It was not with borrowed money.
Yeah.
And since then, the properties have indeed here in Florida doubled again.
Yeah.
And so from 2020 to 2023, my properties doubled, which before then doubled in the prior 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
And before that, doubled from 1995 to 2007, when it fell in half,
Yeah.
and then came back.
Well, and so you're using leverage as a way to take a position against inflation versus, just letting your property sit free and clear. Hey, you did all this work, your tenants paid them off for you, but you're saying, no, there is something I can't control, which is the government, that I have to take a position against that inflation, which is, it's not just refinance, but refinance, and not just take that money and go on vacation, but take that money and buy more properties, knowing that there is consequences to inflation.
And buying better properties.
And improving.
And buying better properties. My monies coming in were used to add cash or add payments to a small house to get a better house. To trade 3 little tiny houses I've never had bad neighborhoods, but in a modest neighborhood for a better house on a better lot in a better neighborhood. That one house, which was a pride of ownership house, replaced 3 lesser houses. For me, I can afford to do that as I'm building my portfolio.
Yeah.
And for them, it gave them the ability to still have an estate for their kids and have some income to supplement their Social Security and their pension.
Okay, last question for you before we wrap this up. What do you have to say about people who over leverage, especially early on, with their, too aggressive with leverage?
I don't think you can be too aggressive with leverage. I think you can make foolish choices with the leverage. So if you borrow money and you borrow it from an institution, so you're taking a risk on a very inflation-susceptible company. The lenders are the suckers in the community when they lend money at fixed rates and at fixed payments to people who speculate in assets that appreciate with inflation and their income, so the lender's always at risk. And no, you don't want those lenders to be so much stronger than you that they can abuse you.
Yeah.
And so I'm afraid of that. Taking the money, for example, had we taken the $45,000 from my friend whose IRA made us that loan and instead bought shiny new cars or gone on lavish vacations, that, in my mind, would have been a very dangerous thing to do, because the money is gone and not
Can't account for it. Where'd it go?
developing a yield.
Yeah.
And so I want the money invested in inflation-hedged income-producing assets. And I think to the extent that I do that, I'm proud of myself. And usually my history is that I've been right. Yeah. Sometimes I'm wrong, but I'm going to take a stand and take a step and make an investment.
Well, Pete, that's so huge, guys. This is critical. Listen to someone who's been investing since the 60s, who's seen different market cycles, because a lot of folks, who've been in the business for 10 years haven't seen what Pete has seen. And so, look, I appreciate that advice. It's something to take heed to. And as always, Pete, thank you.
Thank you. But realize you don't have to live through it. There's history books.
Yep, you can
and
study
some of
it.
them are actually true. And there's newsletters, and there's diaries, and the courthouse has all kinds of documents recorded where you can see what did happen, and you can take a look back.
Yeah, like I'm reading through Jack Miller's newsletters from the
Exactly,
1970s. I'm in the
exactly.
80s right now. Every month he wrote a newsletter, and it's helping me study the different markets, but also what did he have to do as an investor? What did he have to become? So,
Yeah.
Pete, as usual, thank you for your thoughts.
Anytime, Courtney.